Winter is quickly approaching, and for some of you, this is your favorite season. You are patiently or impatiently awaiting the arrival of Christmas and all of its festivities. For others of you, you were dreading your walk out to Barrington this afternoon. It's cold, it's gray, it's pretty brisk outside. I'll admit I really do love winter, but one of my least favorite parts about this time of year is how barren everything is, how empty the trees are, and how the color and life that once flooded the campus, that physical plant tended to all the flowers with, is now dead and gone. But we have hope that spring will come again. These flowers will rebloom, and the trees will bear leaves again. When I was younger, though, my hope of spring was not so assured. See, I grew up believing that if I sinned just a little bit too much or a little bit too badly, then God wouldn't have grace for me. I had to tend to the garden as well as I could. By the time I was 13, I had attended 2 purity banquets, a purity conference, written letters to my future husband, and vowed to my fellow 13-year-olds that I would never kiss a boy until I got married. For some of you, these themes ring true. You were taught the same things. In Christian evangelical churches, you were taught that your holiness was directly tied to your purity. Now, I'm not here to argue that purity is without its virtue. Chastity is one of the virtues. I'm here to argue, however, that as a church, we have spent too long talking about purity and not enough time talking about grace. See, the purity movement really came to full fruition in the 90s in response to the sexual revolution and to a rise in teen pregnancy. They pinpointed an actual problem, but the solution to that problem just caused a whole nother set of them. Instead of not objectifying women, we just objectified women in another way. We were no longer talking about their body itself, but we were talking about women as roses, chewed up gum, a cup full of spit, a ripped up $20 bill. If you're hearing some of those metaphors and it's not the first time you heard them, I'm so sorry. And I hope that my project can talk a little bit about this and offer better metaphors and better stories. For my project, I chose to look into the impacts of purity culture. And so this took place in 3 parts. First was my research. I gathered stories from people I knew, but also people online. And in my finding, I found that these metaphors that I just talked about are common motifs in all of these people's lives who have experienced the heaviness of the purity movement. I also looked at the psychological impacts of purity culture and found that cultures that promote purity often also promote victim blaming and silencing victims. I also found a really unique problem in that in promoting purity, we created a new kind of prosperity gospel. If women could hold themselves to the highest standards and engage in the purest actions and thoughts, that they would be blessed with a happy marriage, a happy life, and a family, and all of the blessings that God could give them. Now, I'm not saying that if you do choose to remain pure and wait until marriage that God won't bless you with these things. I'm just saying that if that isn't your story, there is still grace and hope for you. And so my audience for this work is specifically to you 16 to 25-year-old women who have maybe heard broken stories growing up and have suffered with your own mental health and trauma as a result of these problems. But also to the rest of you in the room who maybe didn't grow up in a church that preached purity culture, or for the men in the room, that this would be the beginning of a conversation and of you learning more of your friends' experiences. So after researching, the second part of this project was writing a comic, because that's what you do when you have a really heavy topic, right? You draw some pictures. But I really wanted to take communication skills and theories that I had been developing and learning about and combine them with my hope to enter into the design world to connect all of these ideas. And so I used 3 main communication theories. Identification by Kenneth Burke. I really wanted to create a girl character that was abstract enough that you could all identify with, which gets into the second theory I drew upon, which is Scott McCloud's theory of amplification through simplification. Sometimes it's the simpler stories that amplify the meaning and the truth behind them, the simpler graphics and icons. Because when we see a smiley face, any of us can identify with that. If we have a very realistic comic, my fear was that not enough of you would be able to see yourselves in that. And third is Sonia Foss's fantasy theme criticism. So for those of you who have heard those metaphors and they rung true, or they reminded you of something growing up, those are your own little fantasy themes. They're shared experiences or icons or phrases that we have that tie us together in a community. And so I hope that you will no longer view roses as something that can be crushed up and unwanted by your future husband, but things that rebloom over and over. And so here are some panels from my comic. The idea wasn't just to have the roses symbolize purity, but specifically the idolization of purity. In the panel on your left, you're seeing what is happening when this girl is tending to her garden and not looking at anything else in the world. And so the story follows her from a young age all the way into her adolescence and young adulthood, and her wrestling with what it means to be a woman, which in this society, in this story, is to grow a garden well. And when her garden starts to fall apart, she begins to lose her sense of self. Now, one of the interesting things I found in my research was what I said to you about purity culture promoting victim blaming. So the idea that once purity is lost, it can no longer be tended to. And the idea of giving yourself up, of not knowing your own worth, and thinking that just because you lost this one thing, you don't deserve anything better. And so I look to portray that in an abstract enough way. And so once these roses were overgrown, they were all ripped off of her, leaving her with nothing but a thorn in her hand. And just to get more into a few of the panels, I wanted to really show a juxtaposition between the beginning and the end of the story, of what it looks like to have this childlike innocence in exploring the rose garden, and then to have that garden fall apart. But at the end, a new rose blooms in the wreckage, not by any act of her own work or tending to the garden herself, but something divine and supernatural that allows the rose to bloom. It was also important to me that her parents were a part of this story. In my research, I was finding that for people who really truly bought into purity culture and for whom it was ripped away are people whose parents or older generations promoted this story too. This idea that if you stay pure, then you will have a good life. And so it's not until the end of the story you get to see her parents' faces, her mom's face, as she comes down to her level, and it's revealed that not only does her mom care for her, she also understands. The scar in her hand showing that she too experienced the loss of her garden once, but that she was still able to have a family after that, and still able to lead a fulfilling life. And so, back to the question, why write a comic about such a heavy topic? And you could just say, it's just a story, it's just a comic. But our culture is built off of stories, and it's these stories that are passed down from generation to generation that led us to this problem in the first place. Not only that, but we are uniquely situated as Christians to share the story of grace. The problem of purity is not a uniquely American one. In fact, you could argue that it's only worse in other places. People who come from honor and shame cultures, when they lose their virginity, the penalty is death. For us, we can tell a different story, one of grace and one of hope and of regeneration. Our lives don't end when our purity does, or imperfections take place, or sin creeps into aspects of our lives we never expected it to. And so, as Christians, I urge us, let's tell better stories. This is just the beginning, but we need to continue these conversations. Something I learned while developing this comic was that communication is such a collaborative process. I would not have been able to put together this 20-page comic without the help of my friends and my family and the stories of other people. That helps me put together a cohesive piece of work for you all to see and hopefully identify with. I also learned that just beyond being collaborative, that there's a part of art which we learn about this in Com 101. And so it's cool to see it tied into our senior seminar now, that art is both selfless and selfish. Selfless in that I am giving a part of myself to you all and showing you my art, but also in hearing your stories and connecting them all. But selfish because I was the one who wrote it, not you. But my hope, and this is the third part and final part of this project, is that you all will get to tell your stories too. And so I chose to post this comic on social media. And it was just finally posted today. So if you all are interested, you can continue to collaborate with this project by going on the Instagram page. I thank you all for coming here today.